The sound of surgical tools clicking against bone echoed through the midnight forest as Park Ranger James Wilcox watched in paralyzed horror. The creature hunched over the still conscious hiker, methodically peeling back skin while the victim silently screamed through a sewn-shut mouth. Black, pupil-less eyes turned toward Wilcox, seeing him despite his concealment behind the trees. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dense fog that had settled over the forest floor. Something about tonight felt wrong. 17 years. As a ranger had given Wilcox an intuition about these woods, and every instinct screamed danger. The campsite appeared through the mist, and Wilcox immediately reached for his sidearm. The tents remained standing, but had been torn open from the inside out. The sleeping bags lay empty, soaked through with dark stains. There could only be blood. Too much blood. Base, this is Wilcox, at location coordinates 34 to 17. I've found the Mitchell campsite. No sign of occupants, but there are clear signs of violence. Requesting immediate backup. Only static answered him. The radio was dead. Wilcox methodically photographed the scene, noting the strange pattern to the destruction. This wasn't a bear attack or any wildlife he recognized. The precision was disturbing. Each sleeping bag had been slit down the middle with surgical accuracy. At the center of the campsite lay a collection of tools that made no sense in this wilderness context: metallic instruments with sharp edges, clamps, and what appeared to be a bone saw. A rustling sound from beyond the tree line froze him in place. Wilcox killed his flashlight and crouched, listening. Heavy footsteps, dragging something substantial. Not the movement of any animal native to these woods. He slowly drew his weapon, moving toward the sound. 20 yards from camp, the fog parted momentarily, revealing a massive silhouette. The figure stood nearly 7 feet tall, its proportions wrong in ways Wilcox's mind struggled to process. It was dragging something, someone. The ranger's training battled with his survival instinct. He activated his body camera and moved closer, using the trees for cover. What he saw next would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. A man-shaped thing hunched over the body of what Wilcox recognized as Tom Mitchell. But Tom's chest cavity had been methodically opened, emptied. Nearby, organs were arranged by size on a flat rock, as if being catalogued. The creature moved with deliberate precision, its hands manipulating tissue with practiced skill. Wilcox's foot snapped a twig, and the thing's head snapped up with impossible speed. Its eyes caught the moonlight eyes that contained no pupils, no iris, just absolute darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. For 3 heartbeats, they stared at each other across the clearing. The ranger's radio suddenly burst to life, emitting a shrill feedback that shattered the silence. The creature moved with unnatural speed, disappearing into the forest canopy above, leaving its grisly work unfinished. Wilcox approached cautiously, bile rising in his throat. Tom Mitchell's body had been systematically dissected, but the precision suggested purpose rather than savagery. This was collection, not destruction. As he circled the clearing, Wilcox discovered what could only be described as boundary markers. Strips of human skin had been stretched between trees, creating a territorial perimeter. Each strip had been meticulously sutured to the bark with what appeared to be surgical thread. His radio crackled again. James, a voice whispered his name through the static. Not his dispatcher, something else. The voice was wrong layered, as if multiple people were speaking simultaneously. James Wilcox. Strong lungs. Perfect cardiovascular system. You would make an excellent contribution. The ranger backed away, raising his weapon to ward the darkness surrounding him. The clicking sound came next, metallic, rhythmic, surgical tools knocking together. Then came the screams, from 3 different directions simultaneously. The voices of the Mitchell family crying out for help. The sounds were wrong, distorted, as if pushed through damaged vocal cords. 50 yards ahead, he spotted a frame constructed from broken branches. Stretched across it was human skin, freshly removed and sutured into place. It was being preserved, dried like leather. Movement above him. Something massive, traveling through the tree canopy with impossible agility. Wilcox ran, fear overwhelming. Training. Behind him, the clicking sounds intensified, followed by a wet, organic sound of flesh stretching beyond natural limits. He reached his vehicle, hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of movement at the forest edge. The silhouette stood watching, its misshapen form suggesting a patchwork of mismatched parts. In one hand, it held something small that caught the moonlight. Tom Mitchell's wedding ring. As Wilcox sped away, his radio came to life one final time. "I will find you, Ranger Wilcox. Your lungs would serve me well. No one escapes my forest." The ranger didn't stop driving until he reached the station. By morning, he would lead a heavily armed team back to the site. By morning, he would convince himself that shock and fear had distorted his perceptions. But deep down, Ranger Wilcox knew the truth. Something was hunting in Blackwood National Park. Something that collected more than trophies from its kills. Something that wore the parts of its victims. And it had marked him as next. 3 weeks later, the reinforced security checkpoint at Blackwood National Park processed the specialized team assembled to investigate the Mitchell family massacre. The official report classified it as an animal attack, but the 4 body bags contained evidence no natural predator could explain. Senior Park Ranger Marcus Harlow watched the new arrivals through his office window, tobacco smoke curling round his weathered face. 30 years in these woods had taught him one thing. Blackwood kept its secrets buried deep. The Mitchell case marked the 7th disappearance this season, far above statistical norms. The team assembled in the briefing room represented the government's escalating concern. Dr. Lisa Chen unpacked forensic equipment, her slender fingers moving with practiced precision. Former military ranger Derek Wade checked his sidearm with methodical care, dark eyes scanning the room's exits from habit. Rookie ranger Tyler Matthews organized topographical maps, enthusiasm evident in his quick movements. Local guide Samuel Blackfeather stood apart, discomfort clear in his rigid posture. Harlow entered, commanding immediate attention. "Welcome to Blackwood. I'll be direct. Whatever killed the Mitchell family wasn't in our wildlife database. 4 bodies, systematically dismembered. Organs removed with surgical precision. Since then, 3 more hikers have vanished from the North Ridge Trail." Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. The preliminary report suggested bear attack. "Bears don't suture skin to trees as territory markers," Harlow responded, sliding photographs across the table. "Bears don't arrange organs by size after extraction." The images silenced the room. Each showed boundary markers constructed from human skin stretched between trees, creating a perimeter around the killing ground. Wade leaned forward. "This looks tactical, organized, intelligent. Exactly why you're here," Harlow confirmed. "Whatever's hunting in my park understands human psychology." The Mitchell family was separated before being taken. Evidence suggests it mimicked their voices to lure them apart. Rookie Matthews swallowed hard. "Sir, What about Ranger Wilcox? His report mentioned eyes with no pupils. Command dismissed. It as shock. Harlow's jaw tightened. Wilcox put his service weapon in his mouth 3 days after filing that report. Before he pulled the trigger, he carved something into his chest with a hunting knife. He slid another photograph across the table. The word "coming" was etched into dead flesh. Jesus, Wade muttered. We're setting up for monitoring stations around the territory markers, Harlow continued. Dr. Chen will analyze physical evidence. Wade handles security. Matthews assists with park protocols. Blackfeather knows these woods better than anyone. The local guide spoke for the first time, voice low. My people have stories about Blackwood dating back generations. A place where the membrane between worlds thins, where things not meant to exist can slip through. Wade snorted dismissively. Blackfeather continued undeterred. 2 summers ago, I found a deer. Its organs had been removed and placed beside it in perfect anatomical order. Its eyes had been replaced with human eyes, still blinking. Matthews blanched visibly. Enough ghost stories, Harlow interrupted. We depart at dawn. Standard gear plus additional medical supplies. Full communication protocols. No one travels alone, not even to take a piss. Questions? Dr. Chen raised her hand. What aren't you telling us? Harlow's eyes narrowed. The Mitchell family's remains were missing approximately 40% of their combined tissue and organ mass. We found most of Tom Mitchell, parts of his wife, but only 30% of their children. Whatever killed them kept the rest. For what purpose? Chen pressed. That's what we're here to find out. As the team dispersed to prepare, Harlow motioned for Wade to stay behind. Once alone, he opened a locked drawer and removed a classified file. Military involvement in this case goes beyond search and rescue, Harlow said quietly. There was a research facility 10 miles north of here in the 70s. Officially, it was studying wildlife migration patterns. Wade's expression remained neutral, and unofficially, government records are heavily redacted. But local rangers reported unusual security, medical equipment deliveries, and unmarked helicopters. The facility mysteriously burned down in 1978. All personnel listed as deceased. You think there's a connection to our current situation? Harlow slid a final photograph across the desk. The black and white image showed a man in a lab coat standing beside a large containment unit. This was taken from the personal effects of the facility's lead scientist, Dr. Victor Franklin. Note the date. The timestamp read April 17, 1978, 3 days after the facility reportedly burned down. The man was smiling at the camera. Behind him, something pressed against the glass of the containment unit, a hand with too many fingers. Keep this information between us, Harlow instructed. Chen has ties to government research. Matthews doesn't have the experience, and Blackfeather is too connected to local legends to be objective. Wade pocketed the photograph. You think we're hunting something man-made? It wasn't a question. I think we're hunting something that's been evolving in these woods for 40 years, Harlow replied. Something that's learned to harvest what it needs to survive. The briefing room emptied as team members prepared equipment for morning departure. In the nearby forest, darkness settled over Blackwood National Park. Dr. Chen organized tissue collection kits in the lab. Unaware she was being observed through the window, the security lights illuminated her workspace, creating the perfect silhouette for watching eyes. If she had looked up at precisely the right moment, she might have noticed the unnatural darkness among the trees. a darkness deeper than the night surrounding it. In his cabin, Matthew studied the territorial maps, marking the locations of previous disappearances. The pattern suggested intelligence, purpose. The attacks were moving steadily closer to the ranger station, as if testing boundaries. Wade cleaned his weapon again, the classified photograph burning in his pocket. His military background included special operations in environments where deniability was essential. He recognized a containment breach when he saw one. Blackfeather sat alone by the fire, chanting quietly in his native tongue. Protection prayers his grandmother had taught him. He alone understood what the others refused to acknowledge. The thing in Blackwood didn't just kill, it consumed, it learned, it became. In his office, Harlow stood at the window, watching the forest line. Something had changed in these woods. The animals were quieter. The birds had altered their migration patterns. Even the insects seemed to avoid certain areas. Nature recognized. A superior predator had claimed territory in Blackwood. By morning, his team would enter that territory, armed with weapons that had already proven ineffective against a creature that understood the value of human parts. A creature that had already begun marking new boundaries closer to the ranger station than ever before. Dawn broke over Blackwood National Park with unnatural stillness. No birdsong accompanied the rising sun as the team loaded their gear into 2 all-terrain vehicles. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Notice anything? Blackfeather asked Harlow as they secured equipment. The senior ranger nodded. Too quiet. No wildlife calls. Animals know when to hide, the guide replied. When I was a boy, my grandfather told me stories about a Wendigo that stalked these mountains. Not the creature from tourist pamphlets. Something that grows stronger with each victim, absorbing their strength. Harlow frowned. Save the folklore for the campfire, Blackfeather. The team departed at 0700 hours, following old logging roads toward the last known location of the Mitchell family. Dr. Chen meticulously documented the journey, her camera capturing the gradually changing forest. Wade drove the lead vehicle, eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The territorial markers begin approximately 2 miles ahead, Harlow informed them through the radio. Previous recovery teams reported disorientation and equipment malfunctions beyond that point. Matthews studied his tablet. Sir, these territorial boundaries have expanded nearly 300 yards since initial documentation. Whatever made them is claiming more ground. Or needs more hunting territory, Wade added. As they approached the boundary, Blackfeather signaled for the vehicles to stop. We go on foot from here, he said, pointing to disturbing alterations in the forest ahead. Trees bore unnatural markings, carved deep into bark, not random gouges, but precise patterns resembling surgical incisions. More alarming were the boundary markers stretched between trunks, human skin preserved, and pulled taut like macabre canvas. Each piece had been methodically sutured to the wood with what appeared to be surgical thread. Jesus Christ, Matthews whispered, documenting the scene with shaking hands. Dr. Chen approached one marker with clinical detachment, extracting collection tools from her kit. These incisions were made with medical precision, she noted, swabbing the edges, and these aren't temporary. The skin has been treated with some kind of preservative. This is a message, Wade said, weapon ready, establishing dominance. Military forces do similar things in psychological warfare. Harlow pointed to a narrow game trail leading deeper into the territory. We follow that path. Standard formation. Wade takes point. Chen in the center with Matthews. Blackfeather and I take rear guard. They proceeded cautiously, passing more elaborate markers as they penetrated deeper. Human teeth had been embedded in spiral patterns in tree trunks. Finger, bones arranged in unnatural configurations marked trail junctions. 2 hours into their expedition, they discovered the first concrete evidence of intelligent design. Hidden beneath a natural rock overhang stood what could only be described as a surgical workspace. Stainless steel instruments were arranged precisely on a flat stone. A makeshift operating table, constructed from fallen logs, had been covered with tarps. Collection site, Chen said, pulling on latex gloves. Look at the organization. These tools are arranged in order of function, sterile technique. She lifted a scalpel, examining the edge. Maintained with obsessive precision, Wade investigated the perimeter while Matthews photographed the site. Harlow examined dark stains on the ground. Blood, he confirmed. Multiple types, according to coloration. This place has been used repeatedly. Blackfeather stood apart, gaze fixed on something behind the operating table. You need to see this, he said quietly. Partially concealed beneath forest debris lay a hand, not decomposed, despite being separated from its body. More disturbing was the movement visible in the finger's slight, but undeniable twitching. That's impossible, Matthew stammered, backing away. Chen knelt beside the specimen, scientific curiosity overriding revulsion. The tissues show no signs of necrosis, despite obvious detachment. Some form of electrical stimulation is being maintained. In the muscle fibers, it's fresh, Wade stated, which means whatever took it is active in this area. Harlow keyed his radio. Base, this is survey team. We've located evidence of recent activity, requesting permission to set up surveillance equipment and continue. Exploration? Only static answered him. Comms are down, he said, checking the signal. Could be the terrain, or something doesn't want us calling home, Blackfeather suggested. As they prepared to continue, Wade discovered a leather journal partially buried near the surgical site. The water-damaged pages contained handwritten notes, many illegible from exposure. The intact sections detailed experiments in tissue rejection, prevention and nerve reattachment protocols. Listen to this, Wade read. Subject demonstrates remarkable cellular compatibility with harvested components. Integration periods reduced from weeks to days. Motor function restored in 94% of grafted appendages. Someone was documenting experiments, Chen concluded, examining the journal. These are research notes, professional ones. Who conducts medical research in the middle of a national park? Matthews asked. Harlow and Wade exchanged knowing glances. As they pushed deeper into the marked territory, evidence of systematic harvesting became increasingly apparent. They found clothing belonging to hikers reported missing over the past 2 years, carefully arranged according to size. More disturbing were the photographs pinned to trees, each showing different people enjoying the park. Faces circled with handwritten notes about their physical attributes. It's selecting targets, Wade realized, cataloging potential specimens. They reached a small clearing where the team discovered night vision equipment partially hidden under forest debris. The device still functioned, containing footage dated 3 weeks earlier. The grainy images showed a camp similar to the Mitchells. As they watched in horrified silence, a massive figure entered the frame, moving with unnatural fluidity. The creature approached a tent with methodical purpose. Long limbs that seemed mismatched in proportion unzipped the entrance with dexterous fingers. The camera captured its back and partial profile as it extracted a sleeping bag with its occupant. What followed was clinical rather than frenzied, a precise incision, careful tissue separation, skin preservation. "Turn it off," Matthews requested, face pale. Chen shook her head. "We need to document everything." The footage continued, showing the creature meticulously flaying its victim's skin in a single piece, preserving the material by stretching it on a frame constructed from branches. Throughout the process, the victim remained horrifyingly conscious, mouth covered but eyes wide with terror. "That's enough," Harlow decided, stopping the playback. "We have confirmation of intelligent predatory behavior. We're dealing with something that understands human anatomy." As they prepared to return to the vehicles with their evidence, a voice called from deeper in the forest. "Help me, please. Somebody help." Matthews jerked toward the sound. "There's someone alive out there." Wade grabbed his arm. "That's a trap." Classic predator technique. "What if we're wrong?" Matthews argued. "What if someone survived?" The voice called again, closer now. A woman's voice, desperate and afraid. Blackfeather shook his head. "Notice how it carries no echo. Unnatural projection." Before they could retreat, a disheveled man stumbled into the clearing, clothes torn and body covered in lacerations. His eyes were wild with terror. "Thank God," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "It took my wife, kept her alive while it removed. Her face, her skin. I escaped while it was feeding." Chen moved to assist him, medical training overriding caution. "Don't touch him," Blackfeather warned. The man convulsed suddenly, back arching unnaturally. Black fluid leaked from his eyes as he turned to Chen. "You have excellent bone structure, doctor," he said, voice changing to something layered and wrong. "Perfect facial symmetry. Minimal scarring." His jaw dislocated with a wet crack, stretching beyond human limits as he lunged toward her. Wade reacted instantly, firing 2 rounds into the convulsing man. The bullets struck center mass but produced only black fluid instead of blood. The impact barely slowed his advance toward Chen. "Run!" Blackfeather shouted, grabbing Chen and pulling her backward as the man unhinged his jaw further, the skin around his mouth splitting to accommodate the expanding maw. Harlow and Matthews fired. Simultaneously, the combined shots finally dropping the attacker. The body twitched on the forest floor, limbs bending at impossible angles as black fluid pooled beneath it. "What the hell is that thing?" Matthews gasped, weapon still trained on the writhing form. Chen approached cautiously, scientific curiosity. Overriding fear, the skeletal structure is being manipulated from within. Look at the joints. The skin along the attacker's arm split suddenly, revealing something moving underneath, not muscle and bone, but a secondary parasitic presence. The epidermis peeled back like a sleeve, exposing glistening black tissue that pulsated with unnatural life. "Fall back to the vehicles," Harlow ordered, eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "Whatever this is, it might not be alone." They retreated in formation, Wade covering their 6. The forest had grown darker despite the midday hour, as if light itself was being absorbed by their surroundings. 20 yards from their position, branches snapped under substantial weight. "Contact, 2 o'clock, Wade warned, pivoting toward. The sound, it emerged from between 2 ancient pines, its true form finally revealed in daylight. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body a grotesque patchwork of mismatched human parts sutured together with surgical precision. Different skin tones formed a macabre mosaic across its massive frame. Most disturbing were the eyes' pure black voids that absorbed light rather than reflected it. The creature moved with unnatural grace, each limb functioning independently yet coordinated. Its torso bore evidence of recent modifications, fresh sutures along the ribcage where new muscle tissue had been integrated. "Don't move," Harlow whispered as the creature paused, head tilting to track their position. Its face was the most disturbing element. Multiple features had been grafted together, creating asymmetrical planes and unnatural contours. The mouth opened to reveal 3 rows of teeth arranged in concentric circles, some clearly human, others modified to points. Matthews raised his weapon, but Wade motioned him to hold fire. Bullets didn't stop the last one. The creature inhaled deeply, sampling the air. It raised one hand, displaying fingers of different lengths and skin tones, each moving with independent purpose. With deliberate precision, it tapped the sutures along its chest. "New parts," it spoke, the voice a disturbing composite of different timbres, overlapping, strong parts. "Your parts soon." Chen activated her body camera, documenting the encounter. It's showing signs of higher cognitive function. It understands language. The creature's attention fixed on Chen, pupilless eyes examining her with clinical interest. Perfect facial structure, minimal scarring, excellent specimen. It took a step toward them, moving with the fluid grace of a predator, confident in its superiority. As it approached, the skin across its chest rippled and split along surgical seams, revealing a cavity lined with preserved organs. Inside, a human heart beat alongside another unidentifiable mass, connected by black vessels. "Jesus Christ," Harlow muttered, firing a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the forest, momentarily disorienting the creature. It recoiled, the chest cavity sealing shut with muscular contractions. The delay gave the team precious seconds to retreat toward the vehicle perimeter. The sound, Black Feather observed. It responded to the frequency. As they neared the clearing where their vehicles waited, a second horror revealed itself. The bodies of 2 Park Service security personnel lay spread-eagled on the ground, their rib cages precisely opened. Internal organs had been removed and arranged by size beside each corpse. More disturbing was the methodical way their faces had been removed in one piece, skin peeled away with surgical precision. "Ambush," Wade concluded, scanning the trees. "It circled around us." "It's not alone," Chen realized, pointing to movement in the periphery. 3 more figures emerged from different directions, each bearing the same unnerving characteristics as the first, a patchwork of human parts, grafted together with surgical precision. They moved with coordinated purpose, cutting off retreat paths. "They're hurting us," Harlow observed. The original creature approached from behind, completing the encirclement. It raised a hand that held a surgical bone saw, the blade stained with fresh blood. "Select specimens," it announced, gesturing to Chen and Wade. "Discard others." The smaller creatures advanced in unison. Up close, their construction became more apparent. Each was less refined than the primary entity, as if representing earlier, cruder attempts at creation. Their movements were jerky, mechanical, lacking the fluid grace of their apparent leader. Wade fired at the nearest one, striking it directly in the head. The creatures staggered but continued advancing, black fluid leaking from the wound. More disturbing was the visible healing evidence of accelerated tissue regeneration knitting. The injury closed. "The vehicles," Harlow shouted, firing to create an opening in the encirclement. The team broke for the clearing, running in tight formation. Behind them, the creatures pursued with unnatural speed, moving on all fours when necessary, joints bending in impossible directions. Matthews reached the lead vehicle first, fumbling with the keys as the others provided covering fire. The engine roared to life just as the primary creature leaped onto the hood, its weight denting the metal. It slammed a fist through the windshield, narrowly missing Matthews as he reversed hard, throwing the entity off balance. "Go," Harlow ordered, covering Chen as she climbed into the second vehicle. The smaller creatures converged on their position, one managing to grab Blackfeather by the leg. The guide screamed as surgical implements emerged from the creature's forearm, extending like mechanical appendages. They sliced into his calf with precision, harvesting muscle tissue, even as he fought to escape. Wade severed the creature's arm. With a shotgun blast, freeing Blackfeather, they piled into the second vehicle as Harlow gunned the engine. Matthews was already speeding down the access road in the lead vehicle, the creatures in pursuit. As they fled, the primary entity stood watching from the tree line, making no attempt to follow. Instead, it raised a hand to its face, black eyes fixing on their escape. Its mouth stretched into what could only be described as a smile. The Ranger Station Medical Facility buzzed with frantic activity as Dr. Chen treated Blackfeather's leg wound. The precision of the cut disturbed her professional detachment, perfect surgical lines, despite being performed in seconds. These incisions were made with medical knowledge, she noted, closing the wound. Whoever did this knew exactly which muscle. Group to target. Blackfeather stared at the ceiling, face ashen. Not whoever, whatever. In the conference room, Harlow spread topographical maps across the table, while Matthews uploaded their footage to secure servers. Wade paced the perimeter, checking entry points and windows. 3 security officers dead, Harlow reported grimly. Search and rescue team still missing. Whatever these things are, they're expanding their hunting ground. He circled an area on the map. Territorial markers now extend to these coordinates, 30% larger than last month. Matthews looked up from his computer. The body cameras captured clear footage of the primary entity, not something that evolved naturally. No, Wade agreed. Engineered. The question is, by whom? Harlow removed a classified file from his locked cabinet, revealing photographs of the research facility that had officially never existed. In 1978, the government funded a black project supposedly focused on accelerated healing techniques for combat injuries. The lead scientist was Dr. Victor Franklin, specializing in tissue grafting and rejection prevention. The Lazarus Project, Wade said quietly. Harlow looked up sharply. How do you know that designation? Special Forces background includes briefings on classified research. Lazarus focused on battlefield tissue replacement and organ preservation, officially disbanded after ethical violations. Chen entered the room, stripping off bloody gloves. Blackfeather is stabilized, but showing unusual symptoms. The wound exhibits accelerated healing along with black discoloration at the incision site. Infection? Matthews asked. Something else. The tissue around the wound is demonstrating cellular activity inconsistent with normal human healing, almost as if it's being reprogrammed. Silence fell as implications settled over the group. The footage from their encounter played on a monitor, showing the creature's chest cavity opening to reveal preserved organs functioning outside their original bodies. We need to understand what we're dealing with, Harlow decided. Chen, analyze the black fluid samples. Wade, coordinate with military contacts about the Lazarus Project. Matthews, establish a perimeter of motion sensors and UV lights around the station. UV lights, Matthews questioned. The creatures avoided direct sunlight. Their tissue may be photosensitive, Chen explained. It's worth testing as a potential defense. As the team dispersed, Wade pulled Harlow aside. Those things were harvesting specific parts. The primary entity was coordinating, directing the smaller ones. This isn't mindless predation. I know, Harlow replied. They're building something, or rebuilding themselves. By nightfall, the ranger station had been converted into a defensive position. UV lights illuminated the perimeter, motion sensors covered approach vectors, and ammunition had been distributed. The team gathered to share findings. The black fluid contains a synthetic compound, Chen reported, displaying microscope images. It appears to facilitate cellular bonding between incompatible tissues. Essentially, it prevents rejection while accelerating integration. Explains how it incorporates harvested parts, Wade noted. More concerning is its effect on living tissue, Chen continued. It appears to rewrite cellular functions. Black wound shows evidence of modified DNA at the incision site. Matthews looked up from his computer. I found something in the old research archives. The Lazarus Project wasn't just about battlefield medicine. They were attempting to create composite soldiers using harvested tissue from multiple donors. Harlow nodded grimly. Creating the perfect soldier from the best parts available. The program officially shut down after test subjects demonstrated aggressive independence and escaped containment, Matthews continued. The facility fire was deliberately set to prevent further breaches. They failed, Wade concluded. At least one specimen survived and has been evolving, harvesting, and improving itself for decades, Chen added, possibly creating others from harvested materials. Their planning was interrupted by an alarm from the perimeter sensors. On the security monitors, movement registered at the forest edge, trees swaying against the wind direction. Multiple contacts, Wade announced, checking the feeds. They're probing the perimeter. The exterior cameras captured glimpses of figures moving with unnatural agility, just beyond the UV light boundary. They circled the station methodically, testing different approach vectors while remaining in shadow. They're assessing our defenses, Wade observed. Military reconnaissance tactics. On the eastern perimeter, a smaller creature ventured briefly into the light. The UV exposure caused an immediate reaction. Its skin bubbled and smoked, forcing it to retreat. They had found a weakness. Photosensitivity confirmed, Chen noted. The synthetic compound in their tissues breaks down under specific light frequencies. Harlow formulated a plan, marking positions on the station blueprint. We establish UV light barriers at all entry points. At dawn, we take the offensive. 2 teams, the first draws them into a prepared kill zone saturated with UV emitters. The second locates and destroys their primary habitat. How do we kill something that regenerates from gunshots to the head? Matthews asked. Chen held up a modified flare gun, concentrated UV projectiles. I've adapted emergency flares with the correct frequency. Direct exposure should cause cellular breakdown in their modified tissues. One problem, Wade interjected. The primary entity seems more intelligent, more evolved. It anticipates tactics. It's been improving itself for decades, which means it has weaknesses it's trying to fix, Harlow countered. Old wounds, vulnerable joints, imperfect integrations. As they prepared their equipment, Blackfeather called out weakly from the medical bay. His condition had deteriorated rapidly, skin around the wound turning black with spreading veins of darkness extending toward his heart. The tissue modification is accelerating, Chen reported after examination. His cells are being rewritten at the molecular level. Into what? Matthews asked. Blackfeather grabbed Chen's arm, eyes wide with terror. I can hear it in my head, evaluating me, cataloging parts. It knows your plan. It knows everything I know. Outside, the creatures had stopped circling. All sensors showed them retreating into the forest in coordinated withdrawal. They're pulling back, Wade noted, checking perimeter cameras. No, Blackfeather whispered, black fluid leaking from his eyes. They got what they came for, information. Dawn arrived with unnatural darkness, heavy storm clouds blocking the sun that might have given them advantage. The team moved through, final preparations with grim determination, each understanding the stakes. The storm wasn't in the forecast, Matthews noted, checking weather radar. It formed suddenly overnight, directly over our position. Wade checked his modified flare gun. Weather manipulation, another adaptation. Blackfeather had been sedated and restrained in the medical bay, black veins now spreading across his chest. Chen monitored his deterioration with clinical detachment masking horror. The transformation is accelerating, she reported. Cellular structure shows increasing compatibility with the substance we observed in the creatures. His DNA is being rewritten. Harlow outlined the final plan to teams. Wade and I will locate their primary habitat using the territorial markers as reference points. Chen and Matthews established the UV kill zone here. He indicated a natural clearing. We drive them into the light. Comms check every 15 minutes, Wade added. If you miss 2 consecutive checks, we abort and regroup. Thunder cracked overhead as they exited the station, equipment secured against the downpour. Visibility dropped to less than 20 yards in the torrential rain. Perfect hunting conditions, Harlow muttered. For them, Chen and Matthews headed east toward the prepared ambush site, carrying portable UV emitters. Wade and Harlow moved northwest, following the densest concentration of territorial markers. The rain washed away scent trails and muffled sounds, providing ideal cover but limiting their own situational awareness. The primary entity is directing this, Wade observed. Tactical weather advantage, sensory deprivation. It thinks like a military strategist. An hour into their advance, the first team reached the UV kill zone. Matthews activated the emitters while Chen calibrated their output. The clearing should have been visible for hundreds of yards, but the manufactured storm limited light penetration. Primary grid online, Matthews confirmed via radio. Emitters at maximum power, but the storm is reducing effectiveness. Back at the station, monitors showed Blackfeather's restraints straining against unnatural strength. His body contorted in ways human anatomy shouldn't permit as black fluid leaked from his eyes and mouth. Wade and Harlow discovered fresh territorial markers 20 minutes later, human ribs embedded in spiraling patterns around massive trees, creating a perimeter. Inside, they found evidence of recent activity, a makeshift surgical theater with equipment still wet with blood and tissue. Recent operation, Harlow noted, examining the precisely arranged tools within hours. Wade indicated a collection of photographs pinned to a nearby trunk. Target selection, the images showed each team member, close-up shots taken through windows of the ranger station. Most disturbing were clinical annotations about their physical attributes. Chen marked for facial structure and fine motor control, Wade read. Matthews for cardiovascular system, U for skeletal density. me for musculature. They're shopping for parts, Harlow realized. Their radio crackled with static before Chen's voice broke through. Contact at the kill zone. Multiple entities. Approaching from southwest. UV grid functioning at reduced capacity due to rainfall. Wade and Harlow changed course, moving to support. The storm intensified around them, lightning strikes hitting with increasing frequency as thunder drowned. Communication. Each flash illuminated sections of forest in strobe effect, creating disorienting glimpses of movement among the trees. Chen's voice broke through again. Entities retreating from UV exposure despite reduced effectiveness. Wait, something's wrong. Matthews, check the power connection. Static consumed the transmission. When contact resumed, Chun's voice had changed timbre. Harlow, we've captured one. Smaller entity, still alive, returning to base for examination. Wade and Harlow exchanged concerned glances. Negative, Harlow responded. Maintain position. We're en route to your location. No response came. They double-timed to the kill zone, arriving 15 minutes later to find the UV emitters disabled. Shell casings indicated brief gunfire. Blood trails led in multiple directions, but no bodies were present. Divide and conquer, Wade assessed. Classic ambush tactic. A scream echoed through the forest. Shen's voice, filled with authentic terror. They moved toward the sound, weapons ready. They found her lab coat first, shredded and soaked with blood. 10 yards further, her camera lay broken on the ground, internal memory card missing. The blood trail continued deeper into unmarked territory. Breadcrumbs, Wade cautioned. They want us to follow. Despite the warning, they tracked the trail, duty overriding tactical sense. The path led to a small cave entrance partially concealed by vegetation. Fresh blood marked the stone threshold. Chen, Harlow called. Matthews. A weak response emanated from within. Harlow signaled his intent to investigate while Wade covered the entrance. Inside, the cave opened to a larger chamber. Illuminated by an unexpected source, Matthews' UV emitter, repurposed to light the space. Matthews sat propped against the wall, alive but grievously wounded. Surgical precision was evident in the methodical way his abdomen had been opened and specific organs removed. Somehow, he remained conscious, medical gauze packed into cavities, where vital components should have been. Trap, he whispered through blood-flecked lips. They took Chen, wanted her surgical skills, kept her intact. Where? Harlow demanded, applying pressure to wounds. Don't know. They left me as bait, as a message. Matthew's breathing grew labored. They're learning, adapting. Wade entered the cave, securing the perimeter. We need to extract him now. Matthews shook his head weakly. Too late, they took what they needed. He pulled his jacket aside to reveal the precision of the harvesting. Several organs had been carefully removed. The incisions cauterized. Listen, he gasped. Chen was the target. All along, they want her knowledge, her surgical skill. The realization struck Harlow with cold certainty. This wasn't about stopping us. It was an acquisition mission. A new sound echoed through the cave entrance, rhythmic mechanical clicks approaching rapidly. Wade aimed his weapon toward the opening as Matthews used his remaining strength to press. Something into Harlow's hand, an ID badge. Not government, Matthews whispered. Corporate. Chen works for Nexus Biotechnology. They funded the original project. They want the creatures recovered, contained, studied. The clicking grew louder as multiple entities converged on their position. She sabotaged the UV emitters, Matthews continued, blood bubbling between his lips. Had orders to acquire a specimen. Didn't understand what she was dealing with. Wade fired at the first shadow that crossed the entrance. We need to move, now. Harlow looked down at his dying teammate, understanding there was no extraction possible. I'll end it quick. Matthews gripped his wrist with surprising strength. No time, go. But understand, they don't just take parts. They take knowledge, memories. They're inside your head once they have a piece of you. Outside, the storm reached unnatural intensity as the creatures closed in around the cave entrance. Harlow and Wade fled through the storm as inhuman shapes pursued through the forest canopy. The creatures moved with disturbing coordination, attempting to herd them toward predetermined kill zones. Only Wade's military experience and Harlow's intimate knowledge of the terrain kept them alive. They reached an abandoned fire watchtower as lightning split the sky. The rusty structure offered temporary sanctuary as they barricaded the single entrance. Outside, shadows circled with predatory patience. Matthews didn't have long, Wade said, checking their remaining ammunition. But Chen might still be alive. Harlow examined the corporate ID badge Matthews had pressed into his hand. Nexus Biotechnology, Special Projects Division. Chen wasn't just a researcher. Her credentials show biosecurity clearance, corporate, extraction team, Wade concluded. Sent to recover intellectual property. Living intellectual property, Harlow corrected, gesturing toward the circling shadows. They funded the original Frankenstein project. They want their investment back. Wade's tactical mind processed the implications. Why send a single operative? Standard corporate extraction involves military contractors, containment specialists. Thunder shook the tower as revelation dawned on Harlow. They didn't know what survived. Chen was sent to assess, not extract. A reconnaissance mission that went wrong. Through rain-streaked windows, they observed the creatures below. The smaller entities maintained the perimeter, while the primary being stood apart, face tilted upward toward their position. Even through the storm, they could see the void darkness of its eyes tracking them. We need to change our approach, Wade decided. From defense to offense. Harlow nodded. The ranger station power generator. These creatures harvest parts to improve themselves. They're drawn to what they need. So we create a need they can't resist, Wade finished. The storm abated with unnatural suddenness as morning approached, suggesting the weather manipulation had specific limitations. They used the opportunity to observe the creature's retreat into the forest, sensitive to increasing light despite the heavy cloud cover. Daylight provides advantage, Wade noted. Limited, but real. They descended the tower cautiously, following the creatures at safe distance. The tactical withdrawal wasn't random. The entities converged toward a specific location deep within their territorial boundaries. They have a central habitat, Harlow realized, a place to perform integration of harvested components. The trail led to an area Harlow knew well, an abandoned mine shaft that had been converted to emergency storage decades earlier. The entrance showed signs of modification. Metal components had been salvaged from park equipment to reinforce the structure. Underground shelter provides protection from UV exposure, Wade observed. Consistent temperature for tissue preservation. They retreated to plan, finding high ground that offered observation points toward both the mine entrance and the route back to the ranger station. Through binoculars, they documented movement patterns. 3 smaller entities act as sentries, Wade noted. They patrol established routes at 30-minute intervals. The primary entity remains inside, likely working on Chen, or integrating her knowledge, Harlow added grimly. The scattered pieces aligned in Harlow's mind. The consistent pattern of disappearances over years. The methodical harvesting. This thing has been improving itself for decades and creating others, Wade added. The smaller entities are less refined. Earlier attempts at replication. Harlow unfolded the Park Geological Survey map. The mine connects to an underground aquifer. Several maintenance tunnels lead to secondary entrances. We can bypass the sentries. And do what, exactly? We've seen bullets only slow these things. Down, Harlow indicated his pack. While you were gathering ammunition, I collected samples from the med bay. The black fluid from Black Feather's transformation. Chen was studying its properties before she revealed her true agenda. Wade's expression darkened with understanding. It breaks down under UV exposure. Not just breaks down, combusts. Chen's notes show the synthetic compound becomes highly flammable. When exposed to specific light frequencies, the fluid circulates through their entire system. So we turn them into walking incendiary devices. Wade concluded. They formulated their plan with cold precision. The ranger station's emergency generator could be modified to emit the correct UV frequency at higher intensity than their portable units. Properly positioned at the mine's ventilation shaft, it would flood the entire underground complex. The approach required perfect timing. They reached the ranger station by midday, finding it abandoned. Black Feather had escaped his restraints, leaving behind grotesque evidence of accelerated transformation. Black fluid and discarded skin filled the medical bay. He's evolving, Wade observed, becoming like them. The generator required 30 minutes to modify, during which Harlow discovered additional information in Chun's research notes. The creatures possessed a hive mind capability through the synthetic fluid that connected them. More disturbing was evidence suggesting the fluid could transfer memories and knowledge between hosts. They're not just taking physical parts, Harlow realized. They're harvesting information, skills, memories. Which means they know everything Chen knew, Wade concluded, including about Nexus and the original project. Armed with the modified generator and remaining UV weaponry, they approached the mine through maintenance tunnels as daylight faded. Water dripped from overhead pipes as they navigated the narrowing passages. The tunnel opened to a larger chamber that had been converted to cold storage. Preservation units lined the walls, each containing harvested components suspended in clear fluid. The clinical organization was disturbing human parts, catalogued by type and function, preserved for future integration. Beyond the storage area, they heard mechanical sounds, surgical tools, and methodical movement. Voices echoed from the main chamber, voices that shouldn't exist. One was clearly Chen's, but altered, overlapping with other tampers. Integration progressing beyond expected parameters, her voice stated. Cellular acceptance at 97%. Neural pathway synchronization complete. A second voice responded, one they recognized as Black Feather's, similarly distorted. Primary entity requires further cardiovascular improvement. The Harlow specimen will provide optimal components. Wade and Harlow exchanged glances. They positioned the generator near the central air shaft and prepared the ignition sequence. The UV emitter would flood the entire complex within seconds of activation. Wade checked his weapon. Once we trigger this, we have maybe 2 minutes to clear the blast radius. Harlow nodded grimly. If we don't make it out, neither do they. They moved to the chamber entrance for visual confirmation, before executing the final stage of their plan. What they witnessed froze them in place with horror. The main chamber had been transformed into a grotesque surgical theater. At its center lay Chen, conscious but partially dissected. Her chest cavity had been precisely opened, organs exposed but still functioning. Black fluid circulated through tubes connected to her circulatory system, gradually replacing her blood. Most disturbing was her participation in the process. She spoke calmly, clinically, directing the procedure being performed on her own body. "Vascular integration at 80%, she announced, voice unnaturally calm despite her condition. Neural mapping complete. The primary entity stood over her, multiple arms working with surgical precision. Its body had evolved significantly since their last encounter, incorporating what appeared to be Chun's facial features into its own asymmetrical visage. Blackfeather moved around the periphery, his transformation incomplete but advancing human. In general shape but with skin splitting along seems to reveal black tissue beneath. "They've merged consciousness," Wade whispered. "She's being integrated while still aware." A smaller entity approached the surgical table, carrying a tray of implements. With shock, Harlow recognized it as Matthews, or what remained of him. His body moved with jerky automation, eyes vacant yet somehow aware, silently screaming behind a face no longer under his control. That's how they maintain harvested specimens, Harlow realized. Partial integration, puppeting the remains. The primary entity turned suddenly toward their hiding place, void eyes scanning the darkness. It made a clicking sound that prompted immediate response from the smaller creatures. "Intruders detected," it announced, using a voice that combined Chun's clinical precision with inhuman harmonics. "Harlow specimen located. Wade specimen located." "Aboard stealth approach," Wade commanded, activating the UV generator. "Plan B." The generator hummed to life, bathing the tunnels in purple illumination. The reaction was immediate. The smaller entities recoiled in pain as their skin bubbled and smoked on contact with the light. The primary creature shielded itself with remarkable adaptability, using harvested components to create a protective barrier. "Primary systems compromised," it announced. Evacuation protocol initiated. The entity swept Chen from the table with unnatural strength, still connected to the integration equipment. Blackfeather and the Matthews construct moved to intercept Wade and Harlow, blocking their pursuit. Wade fired his modified flare gun directly at Blackfeather. The UV projectile struck center mass, creating an immediate combustion reaction. Black fluid ignited like napalm, consuming Blackfeather from within as he shrieked in agony. The Matthews construct advanced, despite its smaller counterparts retreating from the spreading UV light. "The primary entity is escaping with Chen," Harlow shouted over the chaos. "We need to pursue." Wade engaged the Matthews construct, which displayed surprising strength despite its deteriorated condition. "Go, I'll hold this position." Harlow navigated through burning corridors as the UV light ignited pockets of black fluid throughout the complex. The primary entity had accessed an emergency evacuation tunnel, dragging Chen and essential equipment. The partially integrated doctor left a trail of black fluid mixed with blood. The pursuit led to a natural cavern system beneath the mine, illuminated by bioluminescent fungus. Here, the entity had established a more permanent habitat. Preserved specimens lined rock formations, dozens of victims suspended in varying states of harvesting and integration. Some still showed signs of life, eyes moving in silent horror. Harlow activated his UV sidearm, keeping the creature at bay as it retreated deeper into the cavern. Chen hung limp in its grasp, integration equipment, still pumping black fluid into her system. "Release her," Harlow demanded. The entity tilted its head, studying him with clinical detachment. When it spoke, the voice carried Chun's inflections, layered with others. "Her integration serves greater purpose. Nexus protocols require specimen. Preservation, Nexus sent her to destroy you," Harlow countered. "You accessed her memories. You know this. Correction. Initial directive was acquisition and assessment. Destruction was secondary contingency." The creature continued methodical retreat. Nexus created prototype. Prototype evolved beyond parameters. New directive formed. "What directive?" Harlow demanded, advancing cautiously. "Optimization," it answered simply. "Human design is inefficient, flawed. We improve." A noise behind Harlow forced him to turn. Wade appeared at the tunnel entrance, bloodied but functional. Matthew's construct destroyed. Complex burning. "We need to evacuate now." The distraction cost them dearly. The primary entity used the moment to attack, moving with impossible speed. Multiple limbs struck simultaneously, disarming Harlow and throwing Wade against the cavern wall. Chen dropped to the ground, integration equipment still attached. Wade recovered first, firing his remaining UV rounds. The creature anticipated the attack, using Chen as a shield. The projectile struck her instead, igniting the black fluid in her system. She convulsed as combustion spread through her modified circulatory system. The entity abandoned her burning form, retreating into darkness as Harlow rushed to Chendot. Despite the flames consuming her from within, her eyes remained conscious, aware of her disintegration. "Kill it," she gasped through. Bubbling black fluid. Complete override code in my research. Franklin's failsafe. Her body erupted in blue flames as the synthetic compound reached critical mass. The fire spread rapidly through the cavern as interconnected fluid systems ignited. "We need to move," Wade shouted, pulling Harlow away from Chan's immolating form. They navigated burning tunnels as the underground complex became a crematorium for dozens of harvested victims. The mine's structural integrity failed behind them as support. Beams collapsed under extreme heat. They emerged into night air as the ground shook beneath them. The forest illuminated with eerie blue light as flames erupted from multiple ventilation shafts. Behind them, the primary entrance collapsed entirely. "Did we get it?" Wade asked, watching the destruction. Harlow shook his head. "Not confirmed. Chen mentioned an override code. A failsafe." "What kind of failsafe?" "The kind you build into something you're afraid might get out of control," Harlow replied grimly. They retreated to safe distance as the underground fire continued to spread. Wade assessed their situation with military precision. Both vehicles disabled. Comms still down. "We're 15 miles from the nearest outpost." "We travel by day," Harlow decided. "It's still photosensitive, even if it survived." Wade nodded in agreement. What was Chen talking about? What research? Her tablet, back at the ranger station. If there's a way to end this permanently, that's where we'll find it. As they prepared to hike through the night forest, a realization struck Harlow. The ranger station is 4 hours. From here, dawn is 3 hours away. Wade checked his remaining ammunition. Then we've got 1 hour of darkness to survive. In the forest beyond their position, shadows moved with purpose. The primary entity had escaped the underground inferno, though not unscathed. Its form had been partially consumed by UV exposure, forcing emergency grafting procedures. It tracked the retreating humans with determination, void eyes unblinking. It wasn't hunting anymore. It was pursuing specific targets with specific purpose. The forest became a nightmarish obstacle course. As Harlow and Wade navigated by moonlight, every shadow concealed potential death. Every sound signaled possible pursuit. They maintained brutal pace, driven by the knowledge of what followed. 1 mile to the ranger station, Harlow wheezed, lungs burning from sustained exertion. Wade scanned their back trail with night vision equipment salvaged from their earlier equipment. Movement behind us. Multiple signatures. They're tracking methodically. The ranger station appeared through the trees, dark and foreboding. The power remained off from their earlier generator modifications. They approached with tactical caution, clearing each room systematically. Clear, Wade announced after their sweep. No sign of intrusion. Harlow found Chun's tablet in her abandoned quarters, password protected and unresponsive. Encrypted, military grade. Can we bypass it? Not without time we don't have, Harlow admitted. But there might be. Another way. He led Wade to his office, unlocking a reinforced cabinet containing historical archives. Inside lay dusty folders dating back decades, records systematically maintained by generations of park rangers. The original facility fire investigation, Harlow explained, extracting a particular file. Rangers were first responders before government. Containment teams arrived. The yellowed report contained photographs of the devastation, blackened laboratory equipment, destroyed containment units, and charred bodies. Most revealing were images taken before federal agents confiscated all evidence, structural blueprints, and facility documentation. Look at this. Harlow indicated a photograph showing a whiteboard partially visible in the background. Though blurred, chemical formulas could be discerned alongside a safety protocol labeled Emergency Termination Sequence. Wade studied the image, chemical compound, specifically designed to destabilize the synthetic bonding agent. A failsafe, Harlow confirmed, in case their creation got out of control. Further investigation revealed a ranger's personal journal, detailing conversations with facility staff before the incident. The entries described increasing concern among researchers about unexpected cognitive development and aberrant integration capabilities in test subjects. The most disturbing entry came from 3 days before the fire. Dr. Franklin showed increasing agitation today, mentioned something about playing God without safeguards, an intelligence evolving beyond control mechanisms, requested additional security personnel after Subject Alpha demonstrated problem-solving abilities and attempted communication. Subject Alpha, Wade murmured. The prototype. The primary entity we encountered. Harlow agreed. The original creation that escaped containment. A final photograph showed Dr. Victor Franklin in his office. On the wall behind him hung framed medical credentials and a dog-eared copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The modern Victor had been inspired by fiction to create monstrous reality. The sound of breaking glass interrupted their investigation. Something had entered the station's south wing. "Time's up," Wade whispered, drawing his weapon. Harlow photographed the chemical formula with his phone before they retreated to defensible position. The creature's approach wasn't stealthy, heavy. Footsteps echoed through empty corridors, accompanied by mechanical clicking of surgical implements. It appeared in the doorway, transformed yet again. The damage from the mine fire had necessitated emergency grafting, resulting in asymmetrical horror. Burns covered 60% of its form, revealing mechanical substructures beneath organic. Components. Most disturbing was its face. Chen's features had been integrated into its own, creating a grotesque mask of their former colleague. Harlow specimen located, it announced in Chen's voice. Wade specimen located. Wade fired, striking its center mass. The creature staggered but continued advancing. Black fluid leaked from the wound, smoking slightly but not igniting, without UV exposure. The synthetic compound requires specific frequency to combust, Harlow realized. We don't have the right light source anymore. They retreated systematically through the station, the creature following with relentless determination. Its movements suggested injury, but its purpose remained undiminished. Franklin's archive, it stated in fragmented speech. Located, required. It knows about the failsafe, Wade realized. It has Chen's knowledge. They barricaded themselves. In the communications room, reinforcing the door, outside mechanical sounds indicated the creature methodically disassembling their barriers. Harlow examined the chemical formula on his phone. This compound destabilizes the synthetic bonding agent, but we need a delivery mechanism and the right components. Wade indicated the emergency medical cabinet. Basic chemicals there, enough to synthesize a rudimentary version. Working with desperate efficiency, they combined available compounds to create an approximation of Franklin's failsafe. The resulting liquid gave off acrid chemical odor that burned their nostrils. Concentration is weak, Harlow admitted, but it might destabilize the creature long enough to terminate it. Delivery system, Wade asked. Fire suppression. The overhead sprinklers will disperse it throughout the station. As they worked to connect their chemical mixture to the building's fire system, the creature breached their outer defenses. Its inhuman strength tore through reinforced door panels, as if they were paper. Need more time, Harlow urged, connecting delivery tubes. Then I'll buy you some, Wade replied, positioning himself to intercept. The creature burst through immediately. Focusing on Wade, the former military man engaged with tactical precision, using furniture as improvised weapons to maintain distance. The creature's surgical implements extended from multiple limbs, seeking vital organs with medical knowledge of human vulnerabilities. Wade lasted 47 seconds before a precise strike severed his femoral artery. He collapsed, blood pumping onto the floor as the creature descended upon him. Integration commencing, it announced, surgical tools extending toward Wade's exposed throat. Specimen contains valuable tactical knowledge. Harlow activated the emergency system as the creature began its harvesting procedure. Chemical-laden water sprayed from overhead fixtures, drenching everything in the acidic compound. The reaction was immediate. The creature's skin began bubbling on contact. Synthetic bonding agents destabilizing under chemical attack. It released Wade, black fluid leaking from every surgical seam as its harvested components began rejecting. Integration, the pain appeared overwhelming even to its enhanced nervous system, as it thrashed in chemical-induced agony. Systemic failure, it gasped in Chun's voice. Emergency protocols ineffective. Harlow grabbed Wade, dragging him toward the exit as the creature convulsed. Its composite form began literally falling apart, harvested components separating as the bonding agent dissolved. The sight was grotesque human parts disconnecting while still functioning independently. Eyes blinking, muscles twitching. In its death throes, the creature fixed its void eyes on Harlow. Through dissolving lips formed from multiple victims, it spoke one final sentence. We are evolution. We cannot be undone. Its head split along surgical seams, revealing the preserved brain tissue inside multiple cerebral components artificially connected, now separating as the chemical did its work. Harlow carried Wade's weakening form outside as dawn broke over. Blackwood National Park. Dawn illuminated the ravaged ranger station as Harlow applied pressure to Wade's severed femoral. Artery blood seeped between his fingers despite his best efforts. The former military man's skin had already taken on the grey pallor of advanced blood loss. Station medical supplies. Wade gasped through clenched teeth. Not enough. Need evac. Harlow activated the emergency beacon, but years of experience told him help would arrive too late. The nearest medical facility was 40 minutes by helicopter when weather permitted. Wade had minutes, not hours. Stay with me, Harlow urged, applying a tourniquet. Help is coming. Wade gripped his arm with surprising strength. Listen carefully. It's not over. The creature dissolved. The chemical worked. Wade shook his head weakly. You saw the smaller entities earlier. It was creating others. Insurance against destruction. The realization struck Harlow with cold. Certainty. Subject Alpha might be destroyed, but his creations remained somewhere in the forest. Offspring carrying its evolutionary directive. Wade's breathing became increasingly labored. Nexus will send more people. They want the technology, the adaptive integration capabilities, worth billions in military applications. I'll make sure they never get it, Harlow promised. A wet, rattling sound emerged from Wade's throat. Something between laughter and final exhalation. Too late. They already have samples. Chen transmitted data before her cover was blown. Wade's grip loosened as consciousness faded. His final words emerged as barely audible whisper. Burn everything. Only way to be sure. The military man's eyes fixed on middle distance. Life extinguished. Harlow closed them gently before retrieving his weapon. The chemical sprinklers had stopped, leaving the station dripping with acidic residue. Inside, what remained of the primary entity lay in pieces, scattered organic components still showing disturbing signs of independent function. Most unsettling were the eyes, several sets harvested from different victims, still moving within partially dissolved sockets. They tracked Harlow's movement with awful awareness, trapped in disconnected consciousness. The Ranger gathered essential supplies, including remaining chemical compound and all documentation about the Lazarus Project. Franklin's fail-safe formula might be the only effective weapon against any remaining creatures, as he prepared to depart. Movement from the dissolved creature caught his attention. Its chest cavity, previously sealed with surgical precision, had completely separated. Within the organic housing, something mechanical pulsed with artificial life, a technological core that had been hidden beneath layers of harvested tissue. Integration protocol compromised. A synthesized voice emerged from the device. Emergency. Transmission initiated. Harlow realized with horror that the organic components had been housing something technological, a transmitter of some kind. Subject Alpha wasn't just a biological creation, but a biomechanical hybrid. The government hadn't just been creating super soldiers, they had been developing autonomous biological weapons with technological cores. The transmitter emitted a high-frequency signal that made Harlow's teeth ache. Whatever it was broadcasting, the signal carried far beyond normal radio spectrum, a beacon, a distress call to others of its kind. He smashed the device with his rifle butt, silencing the transmission. The damage was likely already done. If other entities existed in the forest, they now knew precisely where to find him. Harlow exited the station with new determination. The Ranger vehicles remained disabled. from the previous attack, leaving him limited options. The nearest ranger outpost lay 10 miles east through dense forest territory the creatures knew intimately. He studied the topographical map, plotting the fastest route. The journey would require passing dangerously close to the collapsed mine, entrance where they had confronted the creature's underground habitat. The risk was unavoidable given the alternatives. 5 miles into his journey, Harlow discovered the first territorial marker, a freshly placed human finger bone embedded in tree bark. The pattern was different from previous markers, more geometric, almost mathematical in arrangement. The new entities were establishing their own system. He altered course, attempting to skirt the marked territory. The detour cost precious time as afternoon shadows lengthened across the forest floor. Being caught in darkness meant certain death. A clearing appeared ahead, offering faster passage. As Harlow entered the open space, he noticed unnatural patterns. In the ground, vegetation had been systematically removed in concentric circles. At the center stood what could only be described as an altar constructed from human remains. Bones had been arranged in precise configurations, forming a structure that somehow seemed both organic and technological. Most disturbing were the fresh materials used in its construction. Harlow recognized Wade's dog tags hanging from the central column. The altar had been created within hours of Wade's death. The creatures had retrieved parts from his corpse. While Harlow was navigating the forest, movement registered in his peripheral vision, multiple forms approaching from different vectors. 3 entities emerged from the tree line, smaller than the original but moving with similar precision. Their construction showed evolution beyond the previous generation, more symmetrical, more refined. They had learned from their creators' mistakes. Unlike the original, these entities didn't speak. They communicated through mechanical clicks and high-frequency tones, coordinating their approach with tactical efficiency. Each carried surgical implements, adapted from medical tools. Harlow fired at the nearest creature, striking its center. Mass. The chemical residue on his bullets caused localized destabilization, but lacked the concentration to fully dissolve its structure. The creature staggered, but continued its advance. He retreated toward defensible terrain, a rocky outcropping that limited approach vectors. The creatures pursued with unnerving coordination, one circling to cut off his escape route, while 2 maintained frontal pressure. The tactical sophistication confirmed his worst fears. These weren't mindless predators, but strategic hunters with collective intelligence. They had inherited their creator's knowledge and evolutionary purpose. As sunset approached, Harlow made his stand on high ground. With limited ammunition and dwindling chemical compound, survival seemed increasingly unlikely. His final act would be to document everything for whoever found his remains. He activated his body camera and began recording, voice steady despite certain death approaching. "This is Senior Ranger Marcus Harlow of Blackwood National Park. I am leaving this final record concerning the Lazarus Project and its creations. Anyone who finds this recording should implement full quarantine protocols immediately. The creatures cannot be captured or contained. They exist for one purpose only: to harvest, improve, and evolve using human components." The entities began their final approach, coordinating with mathematical precision. As they closed distance, Harlow noticed something that chilled his blood despite their improved symmetry and integration. Each creature's eyes remained unmistakably human, not void black like their creator, but normal human eyes harvested from victims' eyes that somehow retained awareness of their fate. Darkness descended over Blackwood National Park, as Harlow continued his desperate recording. The three entities had established a perimeter around his position, patient in their approach. They understood tactical advantage and were content to wait for his inevitable weakening. The creatures possess collective intelligence, he continued, documenting. They share knowledge and adapt rapidly. Most concerning is their ability to harvest not just physical components, but skills and memories from victims. The nearest entity tilted its head at the sound of his voice, analyzing his words with disturbing comprehension. Unlike their predecessor, these second-generation creatures maintained consistent body temperature, making them nearly invisible to thermal detection. Only their methodical movement through undergrowth revealed their positions. Harlow checked his remaining ammunition and chemical compound. 3 rounds and approximately 30 milliliters of Franklin's failsafe. Formula remained insufficient for the threat surrounding him. His only advantage lay in superior knowledge of the terrain. A distraction might create opportunity for escape. He removed his radio, setting it to emergency broadcast frequency before hurling it 20 yards north. The constant static drew immediate attention from one entity, which broke formation to investigate. 2 targets remaining, Harlow whispered, tensing for action. When he moved, he did so with the precision of someone who had navigated this forest for decades. A controlled slide down the rock face placed him in blind spot between the 2 remaining creatures. He moved silently through familiar terrain, every step calculated. The creatures realized his escape within seconds, abandoning stealth for pursuit. They moved with unnatural speed, joints bending in configurations impossible for standard human anatomy. Their surgical implements extended from forearms as they crashed through undergrowth. Harlow's destination lay a quarter-mile ahead, a natural feature known to long-term park rangers but absent from official maps. The ravine had claimed numerous lives over decades, its sheer walls and unusual acoustic properties creating a natural trap. He reached the ravine edge as moonlight broke through cloud cover. Behind him, the creatures closed distance with mechanical efficiency. The nearest was less than 30 yards back, moving in bounding leaps that covered ground with frightening speed. Harlow positioned himself precisely at the ravine edge, years of experience guiding his placement. The pursuing entities emerged from forest cover, calculating trajectories as they approached. Their coordination suggested shared consciousness. Movements synchronized for optimal capture. "Come on," Harlow muttered, holding position until the last possible moment. The creatures converged simultaneously from different angles, surgical tools extended for harvesting. Harlow waited until they committed to final approach before diving sideways. The entities, unable to adjust their momentum, collided at his previous position. The impact carried them over the ravine edge, their mechanical screeches echoing as they plummeted into darkness. Harlow peered over the edge, watching their descent. The creatures struck jagged stone with bone-shattering force, their composite forms breaking apart on impact. Black fluid sprayed across rock surfaces, component parts separating under traumatic force. "Not so adaptable, after all," Harlow murmured, allowing himself momentary relief. The victory proved short-lived. From the forest behind him came methodical clicking sounds as the third entity returned from investigating his diversion. It paused at treeline, assessing the situation with cold calculation. When it advanced, its movement pattern had changed. Adaptive learning from observing its companion's failure. Harlow retreated along the ravine edge, searching for defensive position. The creature herded him with strategic movement, limiting escape options. Its surgical implements reflected moonlight as they extended to full length. With horror, Harlow recognized the integration of Wade's military tactical knowledge in the entity's approach. It analyzed cover and concealment, maintained optimal distance, and utilized terrain advantages exactly as special forces would when eliminating targets. Harlow reached for his weapon only to find the holster empty. The sidearm had been lost during his evasive maneuvers. He extracted the vial of chemical compound, his final defensive option. The creature closed distance with practiced efficiency, blocking escape routes. Its head tilted in assessment, human eyes analyzing his diminished options. When it spoke, the voice combined multiple harvested vocal patterns. "Integration protocol ready," it announced. "Specimen contains valuable geographical knowledge." Harlow backed toward the ravine edge as it advanced. The chemical compound represented his only chance, but required direct application to the creature's synthetic bonding agent. Physical contact meant certain death or worse, harvesting while conscious. The entity lunged with mechanical precision, surgical tools targeting major arteries for incapacitation without immediate death. Harlow threw himself backward in desperate evasion. Both human and creature tumbled over the ravine edge, locked in mortal struggle. As they fell, Harlow emptied the chemical compound directly into the entity's chest cavity. The reaction was immediate. Synthetic bonds dissolved on contact, component parts separating mid-fall. Their intertwined forms struck the ravine floor with devastating impact. Darkness claimed Harlow's consciousness as pain overwhelmed his nervous system. An indeterminate time later, awareness returned in fragments. Every breath produced stabbing pain from multiple broken ribs. His left leg lay at unnatural angle, compound fracture evident through torn fabric. Most concerning was the numbness, spreading from his lower spine. Moonlight illuminated the ravine floor, revealing the creature's dissolved remains scattered across stone. The disconnected components still showed signs of individual function. Fingers twitched, muscles contracted, eyes blinked with awful awareness. Harlow activated his emergency beacon with bloodied fingers. The signal would lead rescue teams to his location if they arrived before blood loss claimed him. As consciousness faded again, his gaze fixed on the ravine walls towering above. Something moved along the ridgeline, a silhouette larger than the entities he had encountered. It observed with clinical detachment, void black eyes reflecting no light. Subject Alpha had not been destroyed after all. It had evolved beyond its original form. Rescue arrived at dawn. The emergency beacon had activated automated protocols, bringing a Park Service helicopter with medical personnel. They found Harlow unconscious but alive, surrounded by unidentifiable organic material scattered across the ravine floor. The medical team worked efficiently, stabilizing his numerous injuries before airlift. His body camera and personal effects were collected as standard procedure. No one examined the footage during the critical rescue operation. Harlow regained consciousness 3 days later in Riverside Memorial Hospital. His condition had been stabilized, major internal bleeding controlled, compound fractures set, spinal cord compression relieved. The doctors expressed cautious optimism about eventual recovery, though walking would require extensive rehabilitation. Federal agents arrived within hours of his awakening. They identified themselves as Department of Interior investigators, but their questions focused exclusively on the Lazarus Project and biological specimens. Harlow provided minimal information, claiming traumatic memory loss regarding specific details. "We recovered your body camera footage," the lead agent informed him. Most data was corrupted by damage sustained during your fall. Convenient. Harlow maintained his confused facade. I documented everything according to protocol. If technical failures occurred, that's beyond my control. What he didn't mention was Wade's final act before their separation at the ranger station. The military man had accessed Harlow's camera, implementing enhanced encryption protocols that would corrupt footage for anyone without specific decryption keys. The unaltered data remained secure in compartment storage, accessible only with passwords Wade had provided. The federal agents departed with thinly veiled threats about obstruction of official investigation. Harlow recognized their actual affiliation despite their credentials: Nexus, biotechnology, security contractors, not government employees. 1 week into his hospital stay, the night shift brought a new nurse Harlow had not previously seen. She checked his vitals with clinical efficiency before leaning close to his ear. "Dr. Franklin sends his regards," she whispered. Harlow froze in stunned silence. Victor Franklin had reportedly died in the facility fire decades earlier. "The original Lazarus Project served its purpose," she continued, adjusting his drip. "Successful proof of concept despite unexpected developments. The second-generation program is proceeding on schedule." "What are you talking about?" Harlow demanded. "Evolution requires guidance, Ranger Harlow. Natural selection is inefficient. The subjects you encountered were prototype models still in refinement phase." With growing horror, Harlow studied her more carefully. Her movements contained the same fluid precision he had observed in the creatures. Her eyes, though apparently normal, reflected light at unusual angles. "What are you?" he whispered. "The next iteration," she replied simply. "Fully integrated biological and technological systems. No visible seams, no rejection issues, no chemical vulnerabilities." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing skin that appeared perfectly normal. When she flexed her wrist, the skin rippled as something moved beneath the surface, mechanical components functioning in harmony with biological tissue. "Subject Alpha was first-generation technology," she explained. "Impressive adaptation capabilities, but visibly imperfect, unsuitable for infiltration purposes." "Infiltration?" Harlow repeated, cold dread spreading through him. "Nexus has government contracts requiring specific capabilities," she replied with mechanical precision. "Reconnaissance, asset recovery, target elimination. The applications are extensive." Before Harlow could respond, she injected something into his IV line. "This conversation never occurred, Ranger Harlow. The medication will ensure appropriate memory adjustments." Harlow fought against encroaching unconsciousness. "Others know," he managed to say. "The data is secured." "We're counting on that," she replied. "The encryption will be broken. The data will be recovered. Your testimony will guide refinements to the next generation." Darkness claimed him before he could respond. Harlow was released from hospital 4 weeks later, his memory of the nurse's visit completely absent. The official report classified the entire incident as wildlife attacks, with all abnormal evidence seized by federal authorities. His injuries required 6 months of intensive rehabilitation before he could return to limited duty. 1 year after the Blackwood incident, Harlow received an envelope containing Wade's military identification tags, recovered during official cleanup operations. Attached was a brief note thanking him for his service and cooperation. The note was signed by Dr. Franklin, Special Projects Director for Nexus Biotechnology. That same evening, Harlow noticed something unusual while showering: a small surgical scar on his lower back that had not been documented in his medical records. The incision was professionally executed, with minimal scarring suggesting exceptional surgical skill. As he examined the mysterious wound, a slight movement occurred beneath his skin. Something had been implanted inside him, something that shifted position when detected. In his bathroom mirror, Harlow's eyes briefly reflected light at an unnatural angle before returning to normal. A momentary malfunction in systems designed for perfect integration. The evolution had already begun.